My name is Associate Professor Tooran Alizadeh. I am from the University of Sydney, and I am the lead on the Infrastructure Governance Incubator, and I am also chairing today's session. Inspired by William Gibson's famous quote, "The future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed." This expert panel shares examples of innovative and future-focused infrastructure projects and systems from Australia and across the world. With us, we have James O'Keefe, who is the Director of Roads to Home Program, New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment, Professor Tim Bonnell, the Director of Asia Research Institute, National University of Singapore, and Haruka Miki-imoto from the Tokyo Development Learning Center with World Bank. And finally, Dr. Aidan Wall, Department of Urban Studies and Planning, University of Sheffield. I'm personally very excited about this fantastic line of speakers that we have who bring a vast knowledge and diversity of perspectives. It's a truly international set of speakers. But before we hear from them, if I manage to move my slide again. Okay, my slides are not moving. Okay. Yes, they finally have moved. Sorry, but in the wrong order. Linda, it might be better if you move the slides because it is not working from my end. And I think we will be wasting time if we try to make that work from my end. Okay. Thank you, Linda, for doing that. So before we hear from our wonderful set of speakers, I have to tell you a bit more about the Infrastructure Governance Incubator. And for those of you who may not be familiar with how this works, the Incubator is the flagship funding program of Henry Halloran Trust. Henry Halloran Trust also sponsors the Festival of Urbanism, which we all love and participate in. So as a result, I have this wonderful opportunity of giving an annual report to the audience as part of the festival. And I'm doing this today, just making it clear that I am here on behalf of a wonderful team that I work with. The team comes from 3 different universities: University of Sydney, Monash University, and University of Melbourne. And we also have Planning Institute of Australia, New South Wales, and Victoria branches as the official partners of the project. The project is also helped by a wonderful advisory board, including a diversity of infrastructure stakeholders from Victoria and New South Wales. So with that in mind, Linda, could you please move to the next slide? Yes, the incubator started in September 2020. And so far, we have published our research agenda and also the result of the systematic literature review for the project. And you can read about them by yourself. But today, mostly I will be talking about our work focused on the Western Parkland City, which is the case study at the core of the incubator. Next slide. Most of the people in the audience will be familiar with the Western Parkland City, but just in case, if there is anyone who's not from New South Wales, this is a massive strategic planning project in spatial terms, central to major metropolitan restructuring of the Sydney metropolitan region under the 6 cities planned, encompassing infrastructure provision across a generational time period, catalyzed through the funding of a new Western Sydney airport. It also includes a range of novel governance approaches, such as the Western City-City Deal and Place Infrastructure Compacts. It's a truly complex project from different perspectives. From country, it has the largest urban Indigenous population, including serious social equity issues and environmental challenges. Next slide. So far, we have conducted 53 interviews, bringing together a diversity of voices from federal, state, local governments, First Nation participants, and other non-government voices. I am very proud of the wide range of stakeholders that we managed to engage with as part of this research. And in the next few slides, you will be hearing the highlight of some of our findings under 4 different themes. So be ready for a bit of overload of information, if you may. Next one, please. The next area of our finding, planning on unceded Aboriginal land. It's just important to clear that it is not our place to define or delimit Aboriginal futures when talking or thinking about planning in Australian cities, but we aim to elevate the insights our participants, many of them First Nation people, have shared with us. So the very first thing is that there have been positive steps towards supporting Indigenous voices throughout the project, including the award-winning recognized country guidelines, Indigenous-led design projects, and new Indigenous roles within some key governments authorities to support engagement efforts. Such commitments are starkly contrasted with the disrespectful Bradfield naming. While there is growing organizational support, participants have also expressed frustration with frequent under-resourcing for important and complex engagement and relationship building work. While the importance of government listening was emphasized, and many participants expressed desire to build toward empowering Aboriginal voices in meaningful positions of decision-making, there were instances of government reluctance to even support advisory roles for First Nation committees. And finally, land ownership is one critical way to facilitate building Aboriginal power and sovereignty in infrastructure, planning, and delivery. Key material actions that the state government could make are to commit attention and resources to advancing the high number of Indigenous land claims currently occurring, and applying a special exemption to biodiversity offset obligations. Next one. The second area of our finding is around governance integration. For what is widely acknowledged to be an existing highly siloed and fractured planning context in New South Wales, the Western Sydney City Deal is generally seen to be substantial progress towards improving practice of multi-scale government integration. As the project has evolved, practice of integration have been improved through new forums, committees, and network for intergovernment collaboration, and continuing practices of staff secondment to promote knowledge sharing and relationship building. However, a range of important shortfalls are noted. Most of them are around funding, because it's been noted that funding is mostly about short-term project-based commitments. It's inadequate for the reality of strong place ambitions. And many participants have also noted the need to encompass broader systematic attention to transforming New South Wales' existing system of infrastructure governance. The next area of our learnings are about the capacity to address societal end goals, such as climate crisis and socio-economic inequities. Many of our participants have shared that the job focus has overly dominated governance priorities at the expense of attention to other important forms of inequity, including affordable housing, public health, and social services. Many participants have also expressed that a lot of important decisions are being made without a rigorous visioning work being completed, and this includes meaningful community consultation. And finally, there are serious environmental concerns being raised about a massive greenfield development in a very vulnerable environment in terms of water issues and heat wave issues that we are quite familiar about in the Western Sydney. And finally, the last line of our learnings are about the importance of accountability and transparency. It's been noted that embedding independent organizations and roles into the governance system has strengthened accountability, but many participants have raised multi-scalar accountability issues across the planning system, and especially the lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities with the complex governance around Western Parkland City. It's been noted that local governments are usually better at social legitimacy, but non-government voices haven't been so far included in a meaningful way in the governance of the project. And last but not least, major political decisions have been disconnected from long-term strategy or accountability obligations, such as major land rezoning occurring before value capture mechanisms were in place. And our capacities to promote infrastructure spending decisions from pork barreling have been questions. Anyway, I'll leave you at that. Could you please move to the next slide, Linda? This is the website, basically the website for the project. If anyone is interested, they can check it out. My colleagues will be sharing it for the rest, for the audience to check them out if they want to. Otherwise, I know that everyone is very much eager to hear from our actually wonderful line of speakers. So without further ado, Linda, if you could move to the next and perhaps in the next slide, James O'Keefe from Department of Planning. James, the floor is yours. Please go on.
Thanks, Tooran. And yeah, it's fantastic to be invited. And I thank the university for inviting the Department of Planning to present on the Roads to Home program. First of all, I just want to pay my acknowledge country and acknowledge the Darug people on the lands that I meet here today. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that you're meeting on, and I acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander colleagues on this call today, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Just next slide, please. So the Roads to Home program, it's a road reserve and infrastructure program, and we're focused on the 61 discrete Aboriginal communities across the state of New South Wales. These are former missions and reserves, and we work with community and we walk with them to provide solutions to improve economic and social and health outcomes. The main focus at this point in time is to improve access, normal access that you have in your urban areas, such as your household waste collection, postal delivery. If there's an emergency, being able to identify what address that emergency trucks need to go to, and any community transport, such as your buses and connection into towns. At this point in time, a lot of these regional discrete Aboriginal communities, they don't have addresses. They're on one big lot. You may have up to 30 or 40 houses on these lots, and they don't have individual addresses. And it's also to improve the health, wellbeing and social outcomes for the community, and to provide some training and employment opportunities. And the focus of this program is through subdivision, dedicating the road infrastructure and the assets to the local councils. So the Roads to Home team work with the community and the local council to work through the planning and subdivision process, submitting a DA, and then the outcome is what the intent of the program is to then for that local council to take on the asset and provide that ongoing maintenance of the road infrastructure. And through the subdivision process, there's also economic opportunities for the communities. They've identified different industries on their blocks of land, and they can really improve that social and economic well-being. So when we talk about the road reserve, at this point in time, it's stormwater and drainage, curb and guttering, which they just don't have at this point in time. So there's a lot of surface water that stays stagnant on there that causes, mosquitoes, and there's just health issues there. There's no street lighting, so there's a safety aspect of that. If you're walking along the street, there's no footpaths. So we're going into these communities and working in installing footpaths, and then upgrading the actual road surface. At this point in time, some of the DACs are just dirt roads, or they have significant potholes in them, and they're just not suitable for travel in vehicles. And there's a lot of wear and tear on the vehicles as well. And also looking at any telecommunication upgrades, installation of NBN and internet, just giving them a connectivity into that area. Next, please. This is an example of one of our discrete Aboriginal communities. It's called the Wali out near Halloran. And as you can see, very remote, and there's dirt roads. This is on one large lot, so they're not subdivided. There's no individual houses on a land title, so it causes issues. You can't get internet through the telecommunication providers. They don't have mailing addresses. It goes to the local post office in town, and it just creates issues. And the part of this program is to ensure that what people have in town is what the residents out at these Aboriginal communities have as well. Next, please. So how the Roads to Home program works is it's a capital grants program. We work with the local Aboriginal Land Council. They set up a specific Roads to Home bank account, and through a funding deed, an executed funding deed between the Department of Planning and Environment and the local Aboriginal Land Council, we provide funding into that account, and they utilise that to engage their consultants and contractors and civil work constructions to implement the works. There's a 3-stage grant process, so the scoping to development application stage, a lot of your planning and assessments, your post-development application approvals, then your operation and maintenance. And we provide that up to 10 years. If they don't not successful in dedicating those assets to the local council, we provide that ongoing maintenance to the local Aboriginal Land Council to upgrade those assets. Next, please. So with the planning stage, there's a lot of community consultation. We term it, we're walking with the community. We're not there to tell the community what to do. We provide them options. So a lot of our work is stakeholder engagement, we hold community events, and it's really through that planning assessment phase that we get the results and understand what the community want. We hold workshops to provide. The program provides funding for what's called a community liaison officer. It's a individual in the community that is employed through the program, and to ensure that communication piece around in the community is understood and they're aware of the program. Next, please. Some of the options that get presented this is some of the options. So as you can see, there's one big lot out here. Option 1, there's no subdivision. We just upgrade the road infrastructure itself. Next, please. Option 2 is where we work with the community and subdivide each individual house block. Next, please. And then the third option is we upgrade the assets, subdivide the land, and then also provide opportunities for additional lots. And that provides opportunities for the local Aboriginal land councils to seek funding to build houses on, or secure funding for home ownership. And that there's a rent to buy program that's not part of this program, but there's opportunities. It provides opportunities for the Aboriginal communities to vote if they want to on home ownership. Next, please. A big part of the program is training and employment. So we work with RTOs and TAFEs to provide that training and to run through the courses and identify that and have our community members work on these projects. Next, please. And it just builds pride in the community. They love wearing their high vests, high vision vests with logos on it, and they see a real sense of pride, and they get tickets and licenses to drive heavy equipment. Next. And that's a group up at Bowra that went through the TAFE program. They've got plant tickets, they can drive excavators, and it provides opportunities for further employment once this program goes through the community. Next. We establish on-site facilities, so the community members can have a specific area where they come together and get debriefed and understand what their requirements are of each day. Next. Important part of this is having a cultural advisors on these projects. There's significant Aboriginal artefacts and burial grounds of the like, and we engage a cultural liaison officer when we complete the works. Next. As you can see, this program, we're outside of the fence line, so we don't go inside the properties themselves. So basically we work outside of the fence lines here. Next. And a big part of this program is we at the completion of the works, we celebrate and come together. We invite our ministers and local members and the community to celebrate the fact that they've gone through this process and understand what the benefits are of the community. Next. I just wanted to acknowledge the significant effort of the Roads to Home team, the current Roads to Home team and the Roads to Home team that's come before us. It's a real privilege to make a difference in Aboriginal communities, and I thank everyone's time for listening. Thanks, Tooran.
Thank you, James. Wonderful, right on time. It's so great to hear from what has been described by many as the best practice example of Indigenous-led infrastructure project across Australia. And with that, our next speaker is Professor Tim Bonnell. But before I invite Tim to start his talk, I just wanted to remind our audience that they can share any questions that they may have via the Q&A function. So later on, we can talk about them. Tim, the floor is yours. Please start.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I don't think my slides are working. There they are. Thank you. So how have people related to large-scale infrastructural projects in the past? And what do those experiences tell us about future possibilities? My recent work addressing such questions has been concerned with political visions through which futures have been represented and how ordinary people have related to them. And the main contextual focus of that interest is the urban region around Malaysia's national capital, Kuala Lumpur, or KL for short. Is that going to change? No. Yes, okay. Greater KL has seen massive infrastructure investment over the past 3 decades, including as part of a long-term national vision of the future, the so-called Vision 2020. In the early 1990s, Vision 2020 was launched by the Prime Minister at that time as the way forward for Malaysia to become a fully developed country by that year. That transition period, of course, is now over, but rather than consign it to Malaysian history, I think that it can provide us with insights into relations between investment in large-scale infrastructure, the political promises which underlay those investments, and how associated changes relate to the lives of citizens. So let's go very briefly back to the future, to KL in the 1990s, when representations of a futuristic 2020 were used to justify development of a high-tech zone known as the Multimedia Supercorridor, or MSC. My own research back then examined how this infrastructural investment ran against the planning emphasis of preceding decades, which had been to spread development to other parts of the country. This revived focus on KL justified in terms of making Malaysia more internationally connected and investable. And I became concerned with some of the uneven consequences of that recentered national development, evictions, displacement of particular groups of people to make way for the promise of a fully developed national future. Such dynamics have resonances for other places today, perhaps even in parts of Australia. Much of the land acquired for the development of the new airport had been home to Orang Asli, Peninsular Malaysia's Aboriginal people, as had parts of what became the intelligent city of Cyberjaya. So they were among the groups whose lives and livelihoods suffered in the name of a supposedly greater good in this region in the 1990s. But fast forwarding now to more recent years, when we approached 2020, I became interested not only in people who had been directly affected by historical material infrastructure developments, but more broadly in how ordinary Malaysians related to Vision 2020. So I've tapped retrofuturist memories. I've excavated how the everyday pervasiveness of Vision 2020 in national parades, school drawing competitions, inflected people's lives and expectations. And I've considered how certain people sought to steer the official vision, whether through electoral opposition, activist critique, or artistic interventions. I could talk for much more than 7 minutes about any one of those things, but in very brief summary, many Malaysians saw mega urban development projects as national infrastructural necessity, and even as objects of national pride. The likes of Cyberjaya and the MSC eventually came to garner criticism, but initially they were largely accepted as national infrastructure. A key reason why so many Malaysians bought into these projects was because the wider Vision 2020 aligned with their own developmental aspirations. The official vision document encompassed lots of dimensions of national development, from ethnic inclusivity to ecological sensitivity, something for everyone. Yet, national transition ultimately became reduced to GDP growth figures, which could be imaginatively charted as rising towards 2020. This had particular appeal for the population of a developing country convinced of the need for developmental catch-up or leapfrogging. But over time, critics of techno-economic growth centrism recuperated other dimensions from the original policy document, including sustainability goals. And some made use of new infrastructure to pursue alternative political possibilities, including journalists making use of government promises to high-tech investors that there would be no internet censorship to develop online media that was critical of the government itself. These are important developments in their own right in Malaysia. They also, I think, have certain resonances in other times and places in at least 3 ways. First is the need, I think, for caution in engaging notions of infrastructural necessity. Even to call something infrastructure seems to imply that it is somehow foundationally important, necessary. That can be a good thing if it really is, but this power of persuasion can also be abused. I would say that this is especially the case when capital-intensive new infrastructure is bound up with futuristic technologies. The allure of what was cast in 1990s Malaysia as intelligent infrastructure lives on in many places today in rhetorical invocation of smartness, smart cities, smart infrastructure, often accompanied with eco or green labels. Second, while the growing emphasis on green or sustainable infrastructure is of course to be welcomed, I, like many others, do also wonder about the extent to which infrastructure developments couched in such terms are still primarily oriented to economic growth, and not just in developing or middle-income countries like Malaysia. It is easy to dismiss top-down eco-infrastructural developments as involving greenwashing, but to what extent do their supposedly green credentials allow attentive citizen groups or demanding consumers to hold the proponents of such projects to their promises? My third and final point has to do with the ways in which ordinary people can be more than either passive consumers or opponents of expert visions of the future. I'm drawn to the notion of prosumers, the possibility of people relating to and reconstituting future imaginaries in their own terms, starting from their own lives, needs, and priorities in actually existing places, actually in some ways aligned with what James presented earlier. Finally, for that to be done without parochialism, I think we all need to be open to experiences elsewhere, and not just those that are perceived to be more developmentally advanced, but from a diverse range of places and times, and taking seriously their historical experiences of infrastructural futures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim, for a thought-provoking presentation. It was great. And without further delay, I am excited to invite Haruka. Okay, I think your slides are jumping all over the place, but I'm excited to invite Haruka Miki-imoto. The floor is yours if you're ready.
Hi, so thank you so much for this invitation once again. I think the organizer is just helping to put, thank you so much. So once again, my name is Haruka. I am operations officer at the World Bank, working for Untitled Chapter, which is the unit in the global program of the World Bank. So today I was very excited when I got this opportunity to speak to you. I am sure most of you are calling in from Australia, and I feel like there's so many we can learn and also share from World Bank, but also from Tokyo. So maybe next slide, please. So I know the time of this is very short, so let me make this very crisp so we will leave enough time for the conversation. Two objectives from my side. There are these global priorities which has been already discussed by the panels as well, also Tooran, such as sustainability, inclusiveness, competitiveness. So how TDOC our program fits in. And then I would like to actually zoom into the case of Fukuoka. It's one of the city which is actually growing, but it is also very well known as a compact city, to see what we can do to make city more green, resilient, and inclusive for all. So next slide, please. Okay, so TDLC, Tokyo Developing Learning Center of the Global Unit. We do different type of events and also activities, mainly to basically boost World Bank finance, lending, and analytic work across the world. World Bank, as you might know, we operate throughout the region. So it's not only East Asia and Pacific, but we do have a lot of reach to South Asia, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean. And I don't think I've forgotten any other region. Right. So a few things we do is we basically bring some of the city mayors and also policy makers to Japan to do some learning tour or technical deep dives. We also provide some technical assistance in partnership with the city partners, and we're going to focus on Fukuoka, who is our city partner, city. And today we're going to also leverage a lot on what we discussed over the event on transit-oriented development and also the landscape or urban scapes. Next slide, please. Thank you. So zooming out a little bit, sustainable development priorities are something we are all aiming as the institution. As you might know, World Bank does have a twin goal, which is one is to reduce the extreme poverty, and another second one is to share prosperity. And even if we go a little bit down, in recent years, our priorities are based on what's happening in the world, both in short and longer term. And I'm not going to mention a lot on the food security, for instance, but we do have a lot of focus on climate change, both mitigation, adaptation, and urban resilience and disaster risk management. So in case you're interested, you can also take a look at the World Bank Climate Action Plan, which is actually already out there since it's launched in 2021, but I think we have a few more years to cover. Finally, the institution also very focused on the green, resilient, and inclusive development, which we call as GRID. So in case you're interested, you can also take a look on those. Next slide, please. Okay, so based on that priorities, decarbonization is something we really need to work in multi-level. And I think that's where the global unit or the global department have the numbers of lending and analytics to kind of help the client countries, which range from lower income to middle income to sometimes higher income countries. When we do it, we have a few ways to decarbonize or go toward zero carbon. So first is better land use planning and regulations. We can also do better job on energy system and transport system, urban water supplies and wastewater, which I guess the former panel have mentioned. We also need to integrate a solid waste management with circular economy approach, more energy efficient green building, of course, and finally, all actions at the national, city, neighborhood, and community level. And I'm glad to see that in the presentation earlier. Next slide, please. So in the next few minutes, let me just give a snapshot of Fukuoka. Fukuoka, in case you're interested, a few words, maybe next slide, please. is that they are one of the largest Japanese cities sitting closer in the southern island. I chose this case because maybe it could be interesting as they are one of the only cities in Japan which have a growing population, which can be very similar to maybe the situation in Sydney, for instance. So one thing interesting Fukuoka is its compactness. Their port, international airport, also 2 city centers, all crowded in 2.5-kilometer radius of the city. They do it because there is the geographical reason, but also it's very historical. And I'm just giving you all the numbers. I'm hoping maybe we can share that information later. Next slide, please. Yes, so when we say the urban planning, it sounds very top down, but it has been very incremental. I think there has been a lot of notion of national planning going toward compact, avoid sprawl. But of course, it was also the local government who was really, constantly trying to make that density. So next slide, please. With the compactness, the city is right now known as very vibrant, competitive city with the biggest population growth, despite the aging population throughout the nation. Surprisingly, they are gaining population, which is about 4.9% a year. That's very surprising compared to the national average. Next slide, please. Why and what is something that attracts this population growth is maybe on one side, it's the vibrancy. There has been Japan across the country, there has been renewal of different buildings. So, urban regeneration is the trend across Japan, but especially in the city center. And they do it often by deregulating the city center, but also giving some bonus when they try to preserve some nature. So they're trying to do both regeneration, but also preserving this open space for all. Next slide, please. Okay, and I think I need to go very quick because I think I have only 2 more minutes. Even in this dense, city where there are very good bus and also subway connectivity along with trains, they do have this missing population who still need to, use cars as that's the major transport choice in the white city, and that part is, colored in orange. And in many cases, this population maybe have some more multiple, issues or challenges such as aging, and maybe they didn't have a chance to live closer to the city center. So this is where city really needs to come in. Next slide, please. They are doing different model, but one thing Fukuoka is really trying hard is the partnership. So they are, crowding collective transformation between private sector, public sector, academia, citizen partnership. And I'm giving you one example, which is, they are trying to see how the city citizen can really thrive until the age of 100 across the city. And this is the partnership collaboration. Next slide, please. Okay, so some takeaway, urban planning, public transport are critical parts to make city more inclusive and also, provide more equity for all. But transformation is combination series of action. It's not only one planning, but it's a series, a continued. A sustainable city attracts talent and talent triggers innovation that brings more revenues. And finally, sustainable transportation is co-creative process and local government can catalyze the partnership rather than just playing only one player. So with that, I think we can wrap up. Thank you so much. Over to you, Tooran.
Thank you very much, Haruka. It was great to hear the story of what's happening in one of Japan's regional cities. And our final speaker, Dr. Aidan Weil. Dr. Aidan, if you are there, we are eager to hear from you. Aidan, you are on mute. If you're trying to say something, you're on mute. You're still on mute. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, and thank you for the invitation. I'm Aidan Wild from the University of Sheffield in the UK. I guess I'm here because I work on future infrastructure as part of a team in the University of Sheffield, and thinking about what infrastructure of the futures might look like and what's unfolding around us, particularly in terms of technological changes and around AI, robotics and automation, and what that means for infrastructure. I was going to talk more about the empirical dimensions of this work, and we've been working in a range of contexts around the world, including Australia, North America, Africa, and so on, and looking at how governance operates with regard to emerging infrastructure possibilities. I'm not going to talk much about some of that detail. I got carried away, I guess, in terms of thinking about the language of the session and to where it takes us. And for me, there are two starting points there. First of all, I guess when we think about governance, I'm really interested in this relationship between innovation, governance, sustainable transitions in the future. And I guess when we think about governance innovation and how that might, we think about how that might shape infrastructures that we already know about. One of the questions I wanted to raise in this session is how do we think about innovation in infrastructure and when the possibilities are to take us somewhere different, and where the innovation is in the infrastructure itself rather than simply being about governance and how we manage things in the present, which are clearly enormously important. But one of the principles of the research we've been doing is to get us to think about what's unfolding around us. And it might unfold faster than we think and take us by surprise in all kinds of ways. So how do we think about those relationships around the governance of future infrastructure and sustainability transitions? I suppose the second dimension for me is I'm increasingly worried about infrastructure futures in terms of the societal implications and in terms of how we think about responses to climate change and the nature of sustainability transitions. And I've got up on this slide around this first slide around infrastructure and what I call enclavisms and sustainability transitions. And the tendency for me towards potentially increased divisions in terms of access to existing and new infrastructure. And we've heard today about governance interventions to try and work towards a more equitable, a fairer future. I worry that as climate change unfolds, other issues such as aging population, as carbon prices increase, the focus of sustainability transitions shifts increasingly towards adaptation and a sort of desperate move by societies around the world, and particularly affluent societies, to protect their existing ways of life and lifestyles. I think in that context, technologies of transition, which offer a way of maintaining existing forms of life and literally in some cases, forms of life support, become increasingly important. So I could have talked today about technologies for allowing the reproduction of life in terms of climate, such as air conditioning or controlled environments or weather modification, which I think are implicated or bound up with issues of automation. But we might extend that to think about other forms of infrastructure that help support life in all kinds of ways, particularly for those who, including for those who might have forms of precarious existence. And we can think about that in terms of population aging. So in those sets of relationships, the tendency for me is that unless there's some form of proactive government or governmental intervention, the more affluent will be better placed to invest in the life support and life enabling infrastructures that help people to survive or to maintain lifestyles in an increasingly sort of turbulent and challenging world. And that might be increased securitized protection of infrastructure enabled enclaves as well. And my first slide is blank because I couldn't really find a decent image of what that sort of future might look like for cities and beyond cities, a much more protection-based framework for thinking about urban life, perhaps. So, if you're able to move the slide on, the thing that my research is concerned with, I'm not going to tell you, I haven't got time to talk in detail about this, are the different forms in which robotics and automation is getting into urban infrastructure and holds a prospect for thinking about infrastructures in different ways. We can think about autonomous vehicles and the automated systems in which they'll be embedded. We think about drones, flying vehicles, robotic support in the home, automated energy systems. And I think there's a lot in there that might support sustainability transitions and also individual enablement. There's a lot of potential in there to do good things in terms of making use of these technological possibilities. But there's also lots of concerns about the reworking of infrastructure around technological logics connected to robotics and automation, and whether that's in terms of increased scope of social control, differential access to relatively expensive new technologies, given that tech firms will seek out the more affluent markets. And of course, a bigger picture for me of segregation on the basis of access to infrastructures and what infrastructures enable. And our research program at the moment is very much about trying to open up the public debate. The argument is, as Wu et al. And others have argued, robotics is coming to a city near you if it's not already there, or it's not already in visions and in imaginaries. Quite what that future means still has to be worked out. One of the things I think that's hugely lacking around that whole set of interest in robotics and automation is a notion of where the public fit in the public debate. And Tim mentioned a peopled discussion. And I'll just end on the final point that the future might be, to modify William Gibson's point, the future, I don't think is all around us yet in terms of unfolding infrastructure technologies, but it might not be very long before it is. I just wanted to start to get us to think about how do we embed or think about future infrastructure technologies in the research that we do on this area. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Aidan. What a wonderful way to wrap up the 4 talks. That's definitely a thought-provoking point. With that, we don't have a lot of time left, but I have one question that I'd like to throw at the entire panel. And some of you may have already touched upon this a bit in your talk. But I'm basically wondering, what is the biggest, the biggest hope and fear that you have for future infrastructure, obviously informed by the work that you have been doing so far. So what's that one biggest hope and fear? Aidan, you unmuted yourself. Would you like to jump in?
If nobody else is going to talk, I'll talk. I think it's the thing I talked about, I think infrastructures are potentially a significant tool of social segregation rather than bringing people together, social spatial. And I think access to infrastructures that enable us to contend with not least climate change are going to be increasingly important. For the millions of people around the world who will struggle to pay for or to have that infrastructure provided, life could look pretty grim. So that is my biggest fear. I think there's a real issue about how we grasp the enormity of the challenge and the role, and the danger is the affluent will pay for the infrastructures, and it will be securitized. The security will be a big part of that, protectionism, and that really worries me. I think it's a scary world, but I'm feeling quite apocalyptic, but perhaps not. But that's my.
But unfortunately, I don't think that you are alone, because I saw quite a bit of nodding happening with other panel members as well. Tim, would you like to jump in?
No, largely what I think actually echoes what Aidan said, and he said it better than I probably will. But you know, I guess to partly build from that in relation to some of the comparative experiences I've had, comparative over across space geographically, but also comparison across time longitudinally. You know, my big fear is that we're kind of locked into cycles of actually very similar cookie cutter replication of things that somehow have failed in the past, but seem to get resurrected in different political cycles. So that's my biggest fear, is that we end up seeing similar mistakes being made, perhaps with different labels and different terminologies. And I guess the obverse of that would be to be more hopeful that people are increasingly open to treat a wider range of different pathways, possibilities in the present as models for emulation or replication.
Building on that, hopes and thinking about the future positive possibilities. James, if I may bring you to this conversation, what government principles can wider infrastructure planning projects led by First Nation?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, I guess my hope for this program is, and what we're seeing with some really good outcomes, is we're listening to the voices of that community, and every community is different. So you might go into one community and use a strategy, but then if you go to another one and use the same strategy, it may not be what that community wants and what those members are used to. So yeah, just be like, for government to be respectful of Aboriginal views and understanding what they need and what they want, and then building it around them, other than building it and then telling them to for people where they should go and where they want to go. And then my biggest fear is I guess not securing funding for continuous work in these communities and ongoing maintenance of the assets. So it's all good and well building these great assets, but if the communities don't have the capability to maintain ongoing maintenance, then we're not doing our jobs well. So that's our biggest fear for Roads to Home.
Yeah, unfortunately, the funding challenges is something that haunts all of us. And Haruka, you mentioned about the role of government in building a partnership with communities. So how do you link that to your biggest fear and hope for the future infrastructure?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I see the partnerships critical is there as much you can do as the local government or even as a national government right now, but they would still serve their jobs, but they would prioritize where they can invest, and they would probably need some support, or they need to actually open up what the public means. So right now in Japan, when we say public or kokyo, this is actually not done only by the local government, but there has been a lot of co-creation happening at the local level. So I think that's the biggest hope. This is actually happening in the transport sector, but also the healthcare and other sector where you actually can mobilize the community. So I think that's the hope. And I guess for the fear, I would like to actually echo James. O&M, operation and maintenance, is something, it's a continued I guess bottleneck and also opportunity. Either it's the OECD country or our client countries as well. So I guess that's a continued opportunity and fear. Thank you.
Yeah, the issue of funding. Okay, but it's good that we can, talk about the power of community and the fact that you guys see basically your biggest hope in, the link and the partnership with the community. So on that positive note, and bearing in mind that, future is still within our hands, and I then mentioned there is a lot more research that needs to be done on that front. I like to thank you guys on our panel. You have been fantastic, basically the 4 different perspectives that you have offered, I'm sure that have left us with, a lot of ideas to pursue in future. And to our audience, you have been wonderful. Thank you very much for your continuing support of the Festival of Urbanism. And please continue the dialogue, online and offline, with all of us. Reach out and continue participating in the remaining sessions of this wonderful festival. And once again, I also like to thank you, the people behind the Festival of Urbanism, Professor Nicole Garen and her wonderful team who make this 2 weeks of celebrating cities possible. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.